Einen wunderschönen guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Dear viewers from near and far, dear Prime Minister Kurti, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation with Albin Kurti, Prime Minister of the Republic of Kosovo, and the President of the ruling party, Lëvizja Vetëvendosje. My name is RENE SCHLEE, and I'm the resident representative of the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation in Kosovo and North Macedonia. I'm grateful for the cooperation with the Karl-Renner-Institut here in Vienna, who hosts this event. Before I hand over to my colleague, Maria MALTSCHNIG, who will moderate today's discussion, allow me a few introductory remarks. Tonight's topic is Kosovo, and to what extent the new government's agenda is a ray of hope for democracy in southeastern Europe that has otherwise seen stagnation, if not regression in democratic practices, just like in the rest of Europe. Anyone who has followed the overall political landscape in southeastern Europe, though, will be quick to attest that a major shift has taken place in Kosovo politics. The electoral win of Albin Kurti's party in October 2019 was followed by a period of trial and tribulations with many ups and downs, which, if you like to read up on it, are best summarized in our FAS analysis, Kosovo, a drama in 5 acts. Never mind the rocky road behind. Out of the turbulent year 2020, Albin Kurti came out with an impressive electoral victory and an absolute majority in the parliamentary election this February, exactly 8 months ago. The government's agenda is as straightforward as it is ambitious: jobs and justice. The stated ambition of Kurti's government stands in stark contrast to previous governments in Kosovo, with a clear social democratic signature and the pledge to put the needs of the many, not the few, front and center. The broad political mandate, though, that Mr. Kurti's government enjoys comes, of course, with expectations. A population that continues to support the policy of EU integration and shares the values of the European Union has grown restless and expects concrete results from the decision makers. As we have seen latest in North Macedonia, where Prime Minister Zoran Zaev just announced his resignation, social democratic reformers depend in this also on international support. So as much as it should make a difference for Kosovo citizens who is in government, it should make a difference for us partners here in Central and Western Europe. That is why it is our sincere pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Kurti, to this discussion. There's a lot to talk about in the course of the next 45 minutes. How do you reform public institutions and policies with a social democratic agenda in a state that has largely seen politics of deregulation and privatization, often to facilitate nepotism and corruption? How do you communicate to citizens that is not more of the same, but demonstrate the sincerity of your approach? What are your expectations from European partners? Ms. MALTSCHNIG, I will leave it to you to unpack the agenda of jobs and justice and the surrounding questions. Let me take the opportunity, though, to thank you once again, our partner, the Karl-Renner-Institut, and you, Maria, personally, for our good cooperation and for hosting us tonight. Today's conversation was, of course, intended to be held as a public lecture, but once again, COVID got into the way. So thank you, dear viewers, for your flexibility in joining us online. Prime Minister Kurti, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, René, for your welcome words and your introduction, as well as the good cooperation with you and the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung office in Prishtina in organizing this event. A warm welcome also from my side to our event, Kosovo, a ray of hope for democracy in southeastern Europe. My name is Maria MALTSCHNIG. I am the director of the Karl-Renner-Institut here in Vienna. Our institute has a strong tradition in following closely the political developments in the Western Balkans. For Austria, and we believe also for the EU, a progressive development of the region and supporting the countries to get closer to the European Union is very important. Therefore, I'm very grateful to be able to welcome Mr. Albin Kurti here tonight in Vienna, Prime Minister of Kosovo. Our event is live streamed on Facebook and our YouTube channel, and this video will also be available after the event on these channels. The viewers, you also have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments on YouTube and Facebook. We already received some. We will try to bring them into the discussion if possible. I will receive your questions via messenger services on my mobile phone, so please do not take it as rude if I look at my mobile phone from time to time. Mr. Prime Minister, I had the opportunity to host an online debate with you, Andreas Schieder, and the Austrian journalist and correspondent in Sarajevo, Adelheid Wölfel, in June 2020, which is 1.5 years ago. At that time, your first cabinet just fell apart after a highly questionable intervention by the former US presidential envoy Richard Grenell, who suggested a land swap deal with Serbia, which you strongly opposed and still do. And I remember you were very optimistic at this time that there will be a snap election soon and that you will have the opportunity again to form a government, this time with a much more stable parliamentary majority. Turned out you were very right in your prognosis. And finally, you took office again in March this year. Now there lie many hopes in you personally and your government. What would you say justifies these hopes? What makes the difference between Kosovo before you came to power and now? And how do you yourself assess your progress so far?
Thank you very much, Madam Director MALTSCHNIG, for having me tonight here. It's a great pleasure and honor to be at the Karl-Renner-Institut, who is father of the Austrian Republic, and at the same time, as I noticed, located at the Karl-Popper-Straße. And let me recall here the three paradoxes of Karl Popper. One being the paradox of democracy, where through democratic procedure, even a tyrant can win. Then the paradox of freedom, where in the name of the freedom, the stronger one can suppress and oppress the weaker. And the paradox of tolerance, where by tolerating, you can end up in a situation where you have elimination of tolerance as such. So we live in difficult times, but we shall sustain and prevail. So this is what makes me, in general, optimistic, the struggle. Struggle is not something in which we give energy and contribution, but it is also something which gives us the strength to move on and ultimately win. So I see politics as a domain of struggle in which my conviction is that social democracy is the democracy and democracy is social democratic. And with this conviction in mind, I organized better and kept working for elections which we won with a landslide victory. Now in Kosovo we have institutional stability and a social democratic governance. For this year, Central Bank of Kosovo is foreseeing an economic growth of 9.9% of GDP. And we took Kosovo with a contraction of 3.1% of our economy according to the World Bank. Exports increased by 2/3 in amount, in value by 130%, which means that Kosovo is exporting more and producing better. Then tax revenues, without changing fiscal policy yet, increased by 1/3, which means that when people are hopeful, they rather spend than save, because when people are afraid, they save. When people are optimistic, they do spend. And when people see that the government is fighting corruption, they are way more ready and interested to pay taxes. And tax administration itself is working better with higher discipline. And likewise, we managed to quite well come about successfully so far with the pandemic COVID-19. We have administered over 1.6 million doses. We are at the top of Western Balkan 6 countries. And in the month of November, only 5 people died in Kosovo due to COVID-19 virus. And only 243 got newly infected in this month. The overall number of deaths is not that low. It's close to 3,000. However, we did best to our possibilities and abilities. And we are also proud that we have a cabinet ministers full with very educated officials and with well-intentioned citizens. Out of 15 ministers, 5 of them are women. Out of my 3 deputy prime ministers, 2 of them are women. We have 3 ministers from diaspora. And we have a Bosniak deputy prime minister, an Egyptian minister, and a Serb minister as well. So there is both diversity and solidarity that we are affirming from top to down within the system. We managed to tackle corruption. Throughout these months of this year, overall number of police operations is over 500, with around 900 raids, and we destroyed 41 criminal groups. Today is exactly 8 months I'm back in office, and last year I was 4 months altogether, but only 51 days with full competence as Prime Minister. The rest I was acting Prime Minister. So I'm very optimistic for the weeks and months to come. And we need help from EU, and we need to strengthen the bilateral relations with all the countries that did recognize us, because Kosovo needs foreign investments. And at the same time, we need to increase trade exchange, including with Austria. For example, throughout these years since 2008, when we declared independence, foreign direct investments from Austria are around $250 million, which is quite low. And I think there are greater opportunities lying ahead with institutional stability that we have. And export-import ratio, Kosovo with Austria is 1 to 10. So I believe that we can increase both imports and exports, but especially exports from Kosovo to Austria. Foreign direct investment in Kosovo is the highest one in the first 6 months of this year since we declared independence, and this is by 1/3 higher than last year. There will be challenges, but I'm optimistic in particular, besides being optimistic in general.
We have a question by Rebecca. She asks, is it possible for you now at the second try to work independently and free of interventions and intrigues and foreign intrigues?
There are 2 components in policy making and public governance. One is the vertical, one socioeconomic transformation with multiple reforms that one has to do. That is how you want to change the situation by achieving social progress. And there is no social progress without social justice. Growth that we are having in Kosovo has to be accompanied by social justice. That's why we are increasing scholarships for students, their numbers and their values in all faculties. Then we are going to increase child allowances and parental leave, and so on and so forth, investing in domestic production, etc. All this for socioeconomic transformation of the society. But then again, what I believe Rebecca has in mind is the horizontal component, the geopolitical one. And it's not possible, if you are a prime minister, to choose all of the time with which one you're going to deal first. But it is important to have as your priorities things which have to do with citizens as end beneficiaries, improving the lives of the citizens. But then from time to time, you have always these traps and intrigues and so on and so forth. But one should have a good strategy, but always bearing in mind that you will have to think as you go as well, because many of the things are not those that you have been able to foresee them weeks or months ago. I think that strengthening of the state helps also in dealing with geopolitical intrigues and traps.
Maybe because it's, I think for our viewers, it's obviously a very interesting question, the geopolitical one. Maybe let's stay at this topic for now. What is your vision for Kosovo? When there was the idea of a land swap between Kosovo and Serbia, you rejected this idea, and I think you have good reasons for that. On the other hand, you do not really oppose the idea of Greater Albania. Should Kosovo be a multi-ethnic state, a second Albanian state, or part of a so-called Greater Albania? What's your vision?
I rejected the idea turned into project for land swap between Kosovo and Serbia, because that would mean new conflicts, new bloodsheds. There can be no perfectly designed ethnic border. There will always be people on the wrong side of the border who are not going to yield and who are not going to accept it. And I always pointed out that this is not a recipe for solution, but the one for war. And the goal of Serbia was just to relativize the statehood of Kosovo. I believe no land swap was ever meant. Rather, it was partition of Kosovo. And a few years ago, two presidents of Kosovo and Serbia participated in an Albach conference here in Austria, where our former president was asked, would you give territory for recognition? And I think that this transactional approach is wrong and harmful. I'm more for transformative approach. The relation between Kosovo and Serbia, dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia should transform for the better both of our societies. And to this end, we should rely very much on EU values. And here I insist that there should be no EU funds without EU values. And across the 6 countries of Western Balkans, still not integrated into EU, this is one of the problems, that there are EU funds without EU values. Namely, rule of law against corruption and oligarchs, facing of the past against war criminals, democratization against autocrats, and a certain balance of minority rights against national hegemonies and dominations. So I always insisted on EU values as something which comes beforehand EU funds. So I believe that Republic of Kosovo should defend itself as a state, and people of Kosovo will never accept this territorial exchange, which is a euphemism for partitioning of Kosovo. But in the past, we had politicians who behaved as if they are monarchs in medieval times, where they can swap territories as if they belong to them, in a sense like private property, and where people are the family of the monarch. And this kind of royalistic mindset is dying out. I'm not saying that the idea of land swap and partitioning of Kosovo has disappeared, but I think that that idea turned into project has definitely failed. We should discuss for the needs of the citizens and communities, not for territorial solutions, which are actually a problem itself. In relation with Albania, towards a citizen of Kosovo who is a Serb, I'm first of all citizen of the Republic. But whenever you bring Serbia into equation with its militarization and its close links with Moscow, then we Albanians generally react as one nation. And we have the same language and same historical consciousness. And we, in this situation, have two states. So the land swap, which was proposed, would have brought new conflicts. And in case of Kosovo and Albania, I would never imagine our unification by starting a war for it or causing in non-democratic way any source of conflicts. So it falls in a totally different register. And to this matter, I would like to emphasize the fact that declaration of independence of Kosovo was never meant as independence from Albania, but as liberation from Serbia. And we shall never forget that. So all Albanians who would like this unification, it is never against someone else, and it is never in order to make us greater, but to contribute to the well-being and freedom as such. So, as an expression of freedom, not as an expression of aggression. And here, as Prime Minister, in this mandate, as you've pointed out, I won on the ticket of jobs and justice. And that's my first and foremost priority. So jobs and justice for all the citizens in spite of their nationality.
You also explained in your first statement that in your government there are also representatives of different ethnic groups. Do you try to also in your party to open the space also for other ethnic groups and to I know there is a representation of the ethnic minorities in the parliament as well, but do you also have this space in your political movement?
Yes, we do, and on several occasions we had non-Albanians running on our list for offices, be that in local or parliamentary elections. However, the reason why majority of non-Albanians do not want to run in any of the Albanian majority parties is because there are reserved seats for the minorities. So for them, it's much more beneficial to try and win a reserved seat with much fewer votes than if they would join our party. So paradoxically, the positive discrimination plays against integration. With the very fact that Oroma, Egyptian, Serb, Bosniak, Turk, Gorani minorities, that they can have a seat by running for those 20 reserved seats, does not make attractive for them to run in as a candidate in our party.
The dialogue with Serbia is still always a big issue. About 2 months ago, there were tensions on the border because of the dispute on car license plates, where you found a provisional compromise in the end, but still the dispute is pending. What's your, I mean, you took over your office 8 months ago, and in between your your periods, there was, for example, there were agreements signed, right, from by your predecessor in September 2020 in Washington. What's your position on those signed agreements? And maybe a second question on the United States. Did anything change for Kosovo with the change of administration in the United States? How is your relationship now?
On 15th of September this year, a former agreement between Kosovo and Serbia expired, and for over 10 years, all Kosovar citizens who were going towards Serbia with their vehicles, they had to pay €5 at the border crossings because Serbia does not recognize our car plates. But the opposite was not happening. So there was this asymmetric relation. What we have done is that we have put also temporary car plates to all vehicles coming from Serbia. And I must say that majority of them are, again, Albanians from Preševa, Medveđa, and Bujanovce, which is in the south of Serbia. So we have imposed temporary car plates as a reciprocal way of responding to Serbia, not as a way of retaliation or revenge, but we wanted these barriers to be removed altogether. And that actually happened. Today there are stickers over state symbols of Serbia and Kosovo respectively. But what has happened meanwhile is that some illegal structures of Serbia answered positively to the call of Belgrade to block the roads which led towards Jarinje and Brnjak, two northern crossing border points and border crossings, and then they burned down in Zubin Potok a center for registration of vehicles, and they tried to do the same in Zvečan. But luckily, 2 hand grenades did not explode. We used our special units of police in order to defend the border crossings and to defend our border police. But Serbia responded by bringing Russian ambassador in Belgrade to inspect the amassing of Serbian military troops at the border crossing. And at the same time, they had lifted up in the air a fighter jet MiG-29. So situation was very tense. I never appeared on those days with my Minister of Defense, only with my Minister of Internal Affairs, whereas Serbia put at the forefront Minister of Defense. And among those troops which came to our border, besides MiG-29 fighter jets, there were also armored vehicles and combat vehicles, Lazar 3 and BOV M16 Miloš. So it was a very tense situation. However, our chief negotiators met in Brussels, and they have achieved an agreement, which we are implementing now, where our vehicles, when they go to Serbia, or through Serbia, they don't have to pay €5 anymore, and the measure of reciprocity has been put in place. Regarding United States of America, I think situation is very different now, for better, of course. And President Biden is one of the most progressive, perhaps the most progressive leader in the world. If you see his program, is a social democratic one. And I think it's one that we all need, not only for United States, but for all of our countries. He is back regarding the issue of climate change, rights of the workers, then of unemployed, and so on and so forth, regarding gender balance and women's rights. So I'm much more optimistic now than ever. First, because we know well who Mr. Biden is, and second, because of his program. And I had the opportunity to also at Élysée Palace, a dinner which was hosted by President Macron, meet with Vice President Kamala Harris, and she had a great speech at this Paris Peace Forum. And I believe that all progressives of Europe have a great ally and partner in United States at the White House. Whereas the issue of Washington Agreement of September last year, there are so many elements in that agreement. I'm not saying that each one of them is not good. For example, mutual recognition with Israel, which was the last point and has been implemented, is positive. But then again, I must say that that kind of unilateral, double unilateral commitment of Kosovo and Serbia on 4th of September last year was more of a tactical move of previous administration prior to last elections there. Then it was meant to build something sustainable for long-term future. So I see in those points more an attempt for quick fix, snap deal, which would help in international image and domestic politics of former president, then it was meant to really help Kosovo and Serbia move forward.
Speaking of international partners, what do you expect from the European partners, the European Union, and especially Austria? How could and should the EU and Austria support and defend democracy in Southeastern Europe, and also bringing the Western Balkans countries closer to the EU?
We need Austria to help us with 5 non-recognizers. It's very important that Slovakia, Spain, Romania, Greece and Cyprus join other 22 EU countries in recognizing Republic of Kosovo. Then we need to have visa liberalization for the citizens of our republic. And since July 2018, we didn't have any step forward regarding liberalization of visas, even though that was the point in time when European Commission for the second time recommended visa liberalization for Kosovo. We have fulfilled all the criteria, 95 of them, which is 2.5 times more than criteria which were fulfilled by, let's say, Albania or North Macedonia or Serbia. And there are no tasks left on the side of Kosovo to fulfill, but EU should finally liberalize visas for our citizens, lift visa regime, and enable us to freely move. The other thing that I believe should be done is CEFTA, which is the Central European Free Trade Agreement, where Kosovo has been represented by UNMIK, United Nations Mission in Kosovo, is not of much benefit anymore. We need to upgrade it into CEFTA, Southeast European Free Trade Agreement, similar to EFTA EEA, like a model relying on what Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland have, and also other countries who were beforehand part of EFTA EEA and then after they joined EU. So a tide that would lift all the boats, all the 6 boats, and sooner rather than later to move fast towards EU, all these 6 countries of Western Balkans. I know that we're not going to get into EU next year or in 5 years, but 10 to 15 years, I think we should all aim that. I belong to those who believe that it's most realistic to expect that similar to 10 countries who joined EU on January 1st, 2004, from Baltic countries to Cyprus, something similar we should have in mind for the 6 countries of Western Balkans, because in this way it will be beneficial for EU, let's say, because historically and culturally we are very important for each other. And once these 6 countries join EU, the outer external border of EU would get shorter for almost 3,000 kilometers. So EU would benefit security-wise, and there is no family in the Balkans who does not have at least one of their members in Western Europe. So in a way, by belonging in the same entity, our families would unite. Because being outside of EU means separated families, divided families. So each family in Kosovo, for example, has at least one member somewhere in EU, and the majority of them are in German-speaking Europe. For example, remittances from our diaspora, which amount to 20 to 25% of our GDP. It's huge. 62% of them come from Germany and Switzerland. If you would add Austria there, we would surpass 2/3 of remittances. So we get united with our diaspora, which represents the bulk of our aggregate demand, of our purchasing power in economy, coupled with increase in security for all of us. For me, EU is our destiny. Europe is our continent. We have no alternative. We may be sometimes critical, but there is no alternative to EU. But likewise, I believe there is no alternative for EU except to include Western Balkan 6 into itself. The essence of EU is enlargement. I believe that EU should stay faithful to its essence.
One of our viewers, Klaus Prömpers, asked whether the announcement by the Spanish Prime Minister to establish a trade and diplomatic office of Spain in Kosovo is a first step towards the recognition of Kosovo by Spain. Do you have any hopes that there is a positive development for Kosovo?
Definitely. There is sort of a readiness of Spain to move away from, let's say, a country like Cyprus towards countries like Slovakia and Greece who do recognize our passports. And Slovakia and Greece, they have their offices in Prishtina. Romania likewise. I believe that Spain should also move in that direction. And with the progressive government, I am optimistic that these signs that we see from Spain are in the right direction, and soon we might expect some positive developments.
Let's speak about social democracy. Democracy, like you said, is one of your very big issue, and you have a very ambitious agenda concerning the fight against corruption and nepotism, and also for strengthening the rule of law. But why do you find it so important to combine your struggle for democracy with social issues like jobs? René said your campaign claim was jobs and justice, or a functioning welfare state, or with distribution issues, distribution of wealth. Why is that important for you?
I believe that social progress is something which should be for the many, not the few. Otherwise, progress for the few rather means discrimination for the many. Democracy is the will of the majority. That's why we should bear in mind always the majority. And justice is not only court justice, it's social justice as well. It's social insurance, certain progressive taxation, and so on and so forth. But to this end, we have to fight corruption. We have to fight those who benefit at the expense of others. People should have their dignified life according to their labor, where the state, as the highest level of organization of human society that we know, should help benefit those who are most in need. We are not identical. There is diversity in societies, but we can be equal. So with diversity and equality, with state progressive intervention and solidarity, we can build together future where we live all in the same society. And continental European welfare state is a good model. And I think we should not abandon it. Of course, one should not fall into nostalgia, but one should never forget some good, positive and progressive things from the past. In the name of 21st century, we should not forget the 20th century. Social democracy is a democracy where you give priority to workers, women, students, children and elderly. Those who are vast majority, but who also can be very easily marginalized from dominating elite of rich men, rich middle-aged men. And here I think we have to work as social democratic parties. In Kosovo, our president is a woman, Madam Vjosa Osmani. It's our second president who is a woman, after Atifete Yahyaga. And over 34% of our members of parliament are women. And social equality must have gender equality. And I think that only social democratic parties understand this best, and they can do it in practice. On the other hand, we need more solidarity among social democratic parties. Sometimes it hurts when you see more solidarity among right-wing parties in Europe than among left-wing socialist, social democratic parties. Of course, there will be differences, nuances, but I believe that we should never forget that EU was built with continental European welfare state coupled with peace through anti-fascism. It's very important to engage for peace and never to forget that this peace is sustainable if it is built in contrast to fascism and in opposition to fascism and in struggle against fascism. I think that it is our duty as social democratic parties to work with people for the benefit of many, and democracy is way more helpful and beneficial for social democratic parties than for others. That's why I'm saying that social democracy is democracy and democracy is social democratic.
Mr. Prime Minister, your party, Vetëvendosje, seeks to become a member now of the European Social Democratic Party. What are your expectations from the European Social Democratic partners? And maybe also it would be an interesting question, what can European Social Democratic parties learn from how successful you are able to gain support for your visions, your reform agenda among the people of Kosovo?
When we wrote our program back in 2010 for running for elections, first time that we entered the institutions of the system, first we were only a protest movement. We continued to be a political movement, but entered the parliament. I remember very well that we were back then inspired by 2007 Hamburg program of German SPD. Mm-hmm. And there I remember there was one sentence that which defined interestingly freedom. Said freedom means possibility to self-determination. And we liked that very much. How you link freedom with self-determination. And we, from the social democratic parties, should not give up on the concept of freedom. Yes to equality, but we should not leave the concept of freedom to the right-wing parties to define it, because we know very well what they do with it in the end. So we should engage in struggle for defining the meanings of notions, because discourses, narratives are very important in organizing people in emancipating societies. So I think that social democratic parties in Europe should have much more meetings and conferences where they discuss and define things, and not allow the right wing to define where we can do perhaps a small incremental positive and progressive change. For example, we should define what development is, rather than saying that, okay, the right wing does the development and we do the sustainable development. So, or right wing does the democracy and we do the participatory democracy or deliberative democracy. So we should not give up essential notions to the right wing, where we from the left just add a predicate, a surname. We should fight for defining notions and organize and emancipate people and societies. And we, Social Democrats, we are known for doing debates best. That's why we should never cease talking. And perhaps I should also now give a floor to you.
It's all right. There's a question on YouTube. There were local elections recently in which the result was not, I guess it was not what you were hoping it would be. And the question is, why do you think your party lost the latest local elections? And do you have ideas how to entice people to cast their vote and practice democracy more?
In latest local elections, we came out first as a party in national level, general vote. But we won only in 4 municipalities. We have very high number of local assembly representatives, but we have only 4 mayors. So One of the reasons is because it's a different ball game. It's like playing tennis, where you can win many games but lose sets. However, there are like 4 main reasons which I believe brought us this unsatisfactory result. One is some defects within our organization. We are much more elaborate when it comes to state, national issues of like socioeconomic transformation and so on, developmental state and so on. Then when it comes to local self-governance, we lag behind in sophistication and depth and in appropriate organizing for that kind of local power. So we are one pair of elections behind in our growth when it comes like to local elections in comparison to the parliamentarian one. Second, all others united against us. And we underestimated their readiness to synchronize and coordinate so well against us. So I applaud them for well organization of their fight against us. Of course, I don't think it was for good, but I must acknowledge, I must give them their due for organizing well. Third element that I would like to mention is the fact that the pandemic, COVID-19, has hit us hard. Because our main way of organizing are public meetings. And we could do only small ones, 30 to 50 people, max 70 in the end. Whereas the public meetings that we do are from several hundred to several thousand. Those are the meetings where our activists become aware that we are together and the majority. And pandemic COVID-19 individualized citizens, and everybody has shrank by 1 or 2 centimeters, you know, looking at their mobile phones all of the time. So in a way, from centrifugal kind of behavior, we ended up getting stuck in centripetal kind of stance in checking our mobile phones all of the time. So I think we suffered much more than the right wing by not being able to organize mid-size and huge rallies. And the fourth element, which some say is the first, the fact that we took political positions in the system after victory on 14th of February this year does not mean that we've taken back to the state the capital which was appropriated by them. So, unfortunately, the extracted capital from our natural resources and public funds still is in the hands of old owners. That's why we want to change the situation by bringing back to the state and society what has been unjustly taken from them. We have also law on confiscation of unjustifiable obtained and inexplicable obtained wealth, but this will take time. Likewise, we are having a process which started with a concept document on vetting, because Kosovo has around 200 prosecutors and we have around 450 judges, but judiciary is generally inefficient and prosecution is generally passive. And we want to change this with the vetting process. We have also initiated the establishment of commercial court because we need that for the business. but at the same time to swiftly get rid of an enormous amount of backlog cases which remain in the Palace of Justice in Prishtina without being addressed for many years. So one thing is to stop corruption. It's completely another thing to correct what many-year corruption has done. That's why also this attack against us as a winning party was very much empowered by this extracted capital, especially by oligarchs. So these are the four elements for which we take full responsibility, and we have had many lessons learned for times to come.
Hannes Swoboda is also watching. He is the former president of the S&D group in the European Parliament, and he has a comment saying we need more people like Albin Kurti in Europe, including the Western Balkans. Nevertheless, we need more integration efforts in Kosovo itself. That's a comment. And maybe last but not least, there's a question from Markus Müller-Schienwald. He is a journalist at the ORF radio, and he is asking, which expectations do you have for tomorrow's meeting with the Austrian government?
It is true that we need more integration in Kosovo, and I believe that labor-intensive investments, which will provide more jobs, especially for youth and women, on one hand, and justice, which is not just court justice, but social justice and fairness of the institutions towards all citizens, can help people integrate. We need to replace migration with employment, and we are already doing bit by bit some brain gains because we had a certain brain drain in the last decade, and we need people of all nationalities to work together, to cooperate, and the state should help them if they cooperate more, be that in industry, in farming, or in trade. On the other hand, I believe that it is possible to have more cooperation across the Balkans. And here I believe that EU and especially Austria can help. And I want to discuss this also with Chancellor Schallenberg, because Austria knows us too well for historical reasons, but also for linkages of our diaspora and the different Austrian companies in the region. I think that Vienna is a hub for the entire Western Balkan 6. Whenever we fly to EU countries, we first come to Vienna. Vienna is our connecting flight. And I would like more role for Austrian businessmen and politicians alike in Kosovo and in Western Balkan 6. In the recent history, we had Mr. Wolfgang Petric around the time when Kosovo got liberated, and we had Mr. Albert Rohan around the time when Kosovo declared independence. So who is a third Austrian diplomat and politician to help us into relations with Serbia and joining EU? The time will show. But I think that also this third stage must have an Austrian in.
As your prognosis of the political developments turned out to be so very accurate when we were talking 1.5 years ago, I'm very curious about your assessment now. What is a realistic perspective, not only for Kosovo, but for the Western Balkans region as a whole? Are there promising developments, interesting political movements? Do you see the way forward? Or we or do we have to anticipate a not so bright future? Just like for rounding up our conversation, the view forward, how is it in your opinion?
I think that the time is ripe for Kosovo to get visa liberalization at some point next year. Of course, it does not depend from us, but I think that whenever I meet European colleagues and friends, they all see it as a great injustice for Kosovo, and expectations of people are so. On the other hand, I believe that also EU is going to have more self-confidence, and this increased self-confidence of EU will also translate into greater trust in Kosovo and other 5 countries of Western Balkans. And lastly, but not by importance, all countries of EU and Europe, for that matter, should, and I believe will, understand that Eastern and Northeastern superpowers are not a solution. I think we have to be very clear on this. EU is here to stay. It should enlarge and strengthen itself. External enlargement and internal consolidation do not exclude each other. But Eastern and Northeastern superpowers are not a solution.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Kurti, for having taken time for this talk. It was a real privilege for us to have you here. Thank you for everybody who watched. We had so many more questions and comments we unfortunately couldn't include in our conversations. Thank you again to our partner, the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung office in Prishtina and its head, RENE SCHLEE. Thank you to the International Institute for Peace for the support of this discussion. Thank you also to Georg Hitsch and his colleagues from Medienwerk for the technical support, and thanks to my colleagues Gerhard Machel, Silvia Rauscher, Sebastian Schublach and Raoul Fakin. The video will remain available on YouTube and Facebook. We very much hope to see you again at our next events. The next occasion is a lunch lecture and book presentation in German language, Die Pandemie in unserer Mitte, with Barbara Breinsack and Hendrik Wagener. This will take place this Wednesday at 12:30, also only online. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.